Hello. What is the current state of digital transformation? How are organisations progressing in their pursuit of business transformation outcomes through digital? How are the best organisations using digital to succeed in those business transformation goals? These are some of the questions that we at Sopra Steria wanted answering. And so we've been working with Kable, and today I'm joined by Will Rhodes from Kable. Will and I are going to have a conversation about our findings and try and get to the bottom of what's happening in the current state of digital transformation in the UK private sector. So hello, Will.
Hi, Richard.
Let's kick off. First of all, one of the most interesting facts that I found, which I think frames this discussion quite nicely, is despite this optimism, this pursuit of digital transformation success, 84% of UK private sector organisations are still feeling that they're not getting enough out of digital in terms of business transformation. Why do you think that is?
I think you picked up on a really good point. It's certainly one of the most interesting findings from the research. And I think one of the key factors is that people at various levels of maturity. You've got some that are just starting on the journey, and then others who are much, much further down that path. If you look at why that is the case, I think various reasons. One was the fact that we're seeing a lot more business line leads taking up some of these transformation challenges. And the important aspect of that is they're actually working very closely with IT, unlike they may or may not have done so much in the past. 82% of the business line leads that we surveyed cited that IT was a real core to their success with their transformation projects. Now, skills still remain a bit of a concern in some areas, although others have certainly upskilled themselves. Others have leveraged third party to be able to deliver those skills. Now, another aspect that we found through the project and the research, was a lack of governance in a lot of cases. And demonstrating governance is really key to the return on investment. And leveraging a third party, I think, is where many people were able to demonstrate that governance.
So I think it's really interesting that you picked up on this notion of maturity straight away. There's obviously clearly a variation in terms of people's experiences with digital and its implications for business transformation. Let's unpack the maturity question a little bit. How distributed were the findings from your survey along those lines?
Well, over half, I think the answer was about 53% of the organisations we surveyed were very, very early in that adoption in terms of, very, very early evolving into digital transformation projects. And many of the people that we surveyed are only doing a single transformation project at the moment. Over half were doing that the case. So there's a lot of opportunity to be doing multiple projects, but people are still sort of holding back to a certain extent, but all testing the water, you could think.
I think this sense of confidence is interesting, and I'm sure we're going to come back to that as how do organisations build confidence. So let's try and get underneath the data a little bit. From your findings, where were organisations jumping off in their digital endeavour? Where were they focusing their digital investment?
Well, there was still a lot of customer-facing, or customer-focused type investments, and that's not surprising. We've seen a lot of that in the past across both the private and the public sector. But then saying that, we are starting to see that maturity came through again with people looking at sort of middle and back office, where they were sort of integrating some of these other systems and seeing the benefits from that.
It's interesting, isn't it, that developing maturity is moving from the immediate customer digital front end back into the more enterprise components of the middle and back office. So in those experiences, were there any particular digital technologies that stood out? Were there any that were more common than others?
Well, core systems and platforms that went across the business were scored very highly, 40% plus in both cases. But actually, interestingly, people were really testing the water with other means like social, mobile, blockchain, even some people even mentioned. So there's a lot of other technologies that people were starting to look at, which is a really positive sign. And I want to say one of the interesting findings from the research was on the financial side of the businesses, people having a lot of confidence in cloud, which we haven't seen so much in the past.
Interesting. And a degree of experimentation, it sounds like. Was that borne out in the different technologies that people were using?
Absolutely, yes. Like I say, people were using a variety of means. Obviously, there's a lot lot of customer facing in terms of social and mobile, but the fact that things like core systems and platforms that span the business shows that maturity again has come through, and they're looking at streamlining processes and the underlying business transformation, not just the customer facing side of things.
And there's a sense from the data that certainly I read that in this experimentation, this use of multiple tools, multiple systems, that the key challenge is the integration challenge. Is how do you put all of that complexity together, integrating not just the digital components themselves, but then the digital components with the legacy organizations and enterprise infrastructure that sits around it. Can you just develop that a little bit for us?
So, the lack of integration came through as a real, one of the major inhibitors or challenges that people face. And I think a lot of organizations have got a lot of legacy systems. They've tried all sorts of things in the past. Many of these financial institutions that we talk to, they have some of the systems that have been running for decades, and it's a bit of don't touch it because it sort of works. And so integrating a lot of those legacy systems remains a challenge, and something to be successful, businesses need to sort of consider unifying some of those, and there's a lot of advantage of doing that.
What about the more organisational aspects around that, around sort of culture and behaviour and indeed skills gap in terms of the ability for digital-minded employees to be able to execute on these projects?
The lack of collaboration was another area that came through in the research that was a challenge, and there's a lot of benefits that people muted around getting those key stakeholders on board early in the process before they even mapped out the roadmap. And like you say, the skills gap certainly came through, and that's why one of the things that we sort of felt that there were the people that highlighted that they had a skills gap were leveraging third parties, I think in a lot of cases, to help fill those skills in a very efficient and quick manner.
It's interesting to see the third-party angle in there. There's a sense in some of the data that the third-party component, those organisations that worked successfully with third parties, were using some very specific elements in the nature of that relationship. Let's talk about how organisations are depending on third parties to deliver this digital transformation success. What were some of the features, the characteristics that you saw in the data?
Well, a lot of people were looking for the third party on the design phase, less so much on the build and hosting and management, the ongoing or the maintenance side of things. But the initial upskilling and bringing up to speed was certainly where a lot of people were leveraging their third party. And the other aspect was in terms of the governance. There was a lack of governance generally across most of the respondents, but a lot of them equally were using third parties, and we can certainly imply that the third party was providing that governance to provide the metrics of success and prove the return on investment.
I think that's one of the most interesting aspects that we see there, isn't it? That this working with third parties gives greater clarity on what we're pursuing, sets up objectives, defines where we're trying to succeed in digital transformation, and then wraps the governance that keeps the project on the straight and narrow and translates it into success at the end of the day. So for you, what was the overarching most interesting observation? If you were to try and pick one piece of data that you found most interesting about your conversation with the UK private sector in this subject?
I think there was multiple areas that came of interest, but the pace by which people are exploring and actually delivering these types of projects came through as really interesting, because a lot of people muted that they had they were experiencing their transformation projects at the pace they expect. And I think there's potentially two elements to this. One is that historically things have been slower or not being delivered at the pace that they expected, and there was some sort of disappointment with that. And I think their expectations have changed a little bit now, and there's a realization of that. But equally, I think there's another element, which is that things are becoming a little bit faster now. They're upskilling faster, they're delivering projects faster, and they're seeing the benefits. So I think it's both elements, actually.
I think that's staggering, isn't it? That 83% of those surveyed said that their pace expectations were being met on the digital projects that they're, I mean, and you know, in the IT industry, that's a huge step change, isn't it? And I like the fact that it's interesting both in terms of maybe some of their expectations were slightly moderated going into this, but actually they thought that through the iterative process of doing digital, they were keeping that pace going. It's an absolutely fascinating stat there. So when we look at the overall package of research, if you were to pick sort of 3 takeaways from the research, what would you give those 3 messages as?
So the first key takeaway really is if you don't have a digital transformation strategy, you really need to get one now. It's become not an option anymore. There's huge advantages to taking digital, and there's a wide variety of technologies that either you can be an early adopter or a fast follower, but really you need to be on that journey now. The second real takeaway is ensuring that you get all the key stakeholders early on board when you're starting that journey. And when you're mapping out that, making sure all those key stakeholders know what their roles and responsibilities are, and that's going to really help you be successful in the project. And then the third and final key takeaway is really recommend taking the opportunity to look at third parties. They can help with the governance to ensure that you have a really strong return on investment, upskill any areas that you feel are lacking, and really just help ensure that wherever you do from the delivery, which as many of our survey respondents did, or through to the management and hosting side of things, they can really help deliver a really successful project.
Thanks, Will. Thank you. A fascinating discussion about the current state of digital transformation in the UK private sector, and much more in the paper that we're publishing together with all of the results and all of the insights. Thank you. And if you'd like to know more about many of the other insights that we've got around digital transformation in the UK private sector and beyond, there's much more on our website. Thank you.